The Morristown Green, a central park echoing with the footfalls of Washington and his compatriots during the Revolutionary War, is not merely a serene escape, but a living testament to the town's pivotal role in shaping our nation. Morristown's history seamlessly intertwines with every individual who grew up there, creating a childhood rich in the echoes of the past and a vibrant spirit of community carried forward by each successive generation. These are their stories. This is Beyond the Green.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Green, where we talk about the people and places of Morristown. My name is Peter, Morristown High School class of 1990, and you are?
And I'm Satiri, or Terry, Morristown High School, class of 1987.
Welcome back everybody to another episode. We're glad you can make it. We're going to have a great show for you today. But before we tell you who's on, I just want to remind everybody there's only going to be 2 more episodes left after this one. We will be wrapping up the season somewhere around plus or minus 1 day of July 19th will be our last episode. But with regards to this week's episode, we have the pleasure of sitting down once again with Bob Ginter. In his, we've created his own segment now called Ginter's Corner. So we basically spent 2 days with him. Once in March, we spent the day with him, and then we did it again over Memorial Day weekend when the weather got a little better. We visited some of Bob's favorite places around town that he liked to talk about. Episodes about 30, 35 minutes. And once again, every time I spend 5 minutes with Bob, I learn something new. On this episode, the locations we visited were Alexander Hamilton School. We spent some time in the high school. We spent a few minutes on Miller Road next to the library, to the Morristown Library. And he has some really interesting tidbits. Really interesting. I think there's a lot of stuff here that a lot of people you may know, but I think a lot of people may not know about Morristown. Again, if you guys out there who are listening or watching, if you live in Morristown, have a business in Morristown, if you are a Morristown High School alumni and would like to come on the show for season 2, email us, send us a message. We'd love to get you on for season 2, which right now, initially, we were going to have start middle of September. We've got something cooking. I'm not going to make an official announcement yet until I got all my ducks lined up in a row, but they're pretty lined up right now. But if this comes to fruition, we will have probably around the 23rd of August, we'll have another episode, a little sneak peek as you want on what we're doing for season 2 already, as we're kind of branching out to, like I said, if everything works out, we're going to be doing a 6-part documentary. So cross your fingers. Hope everything works out for this because it's extremely exciting. So without further ado, unless the Arizona Coyote over here wants to say anything more, I think we're going to send it off. Oh, by the way, Chris Summer is here, folks. It's hot as hell out there. Make sure you hydrate. Make sure you stay cool. Otherwise, you're going to fry like a lobster out there. So, without anything else, here's Bob.
Hello, Bob Guinter here again, and we're now outside, and I asked Peter if we could visit a few special spots around town, and one of these spots is my own home. If you look across the street, across Mill Street, we're standing at the corner of Kenmir and Mills. Number 71 is the house, no, number 67 is the house with the red door. And number 69 is Mill Street, is my house on Mill Street. And those 2 houses to my knowledge, are the very first houses that were built in this area on Mill Street. Number 69, my house, dates back to 1860, and the house next door, built by the same builder, 3 years later, 1863. And a little later, I'll show you another house that's identical with my own house. It's exactly the same design, which was built out on Kenmir Avenue. So there are two sister houses, 69 Mills and 21 Kenmir, identical construction, built by the same builder in the same time frame. So anyway, I wanted to talk about those two houses. And there's another house up on the corner here, okay, on the corner of Sherman Place. That's where one of my good friends back in the 1960s lived. His name was Stephen Schiff, the late Stephen Schiff. He and I were friends all through life up until the point where he passed away, which was 5, 6, 7 years ago now, maybe a little longer. I'm losing track of time. But Stephen lived in that house. The Schiff family bought that house immediately after it was constructed. Now, as I've said before, my family moved to this house on Mill Street in 1958. That house at the corner of Sherman Place was not yet built. It started being built about a year later, and it only took a couple months to go up. It was finished in a short while. We played in the yard there, which was just a mud hole while they were doing the construction. As young kids, we played there. But as soon as the house was built and ready to be occupied, the Schiff family moved in, and Steve then became one of my best friends. So rest in peace, Steve. You're being memorialized right now on this part of my video with Peter. So thank you, Peter. That's what I wanted to show you on Mill Street.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Okay, as you see, we've moved. We are now at number 21 Kenmir Avenue. Number 21 Kenmir Avenue, I met the owner, maybe 20 years ago, and learned that that house was built in 1865. So the same builder who built my house in 1860 built another house on Mill Street, 1863, and then in 1865 came over here and built the third one. This particular house is the identical build out to my house on Mill Street. And that's what I wanted to point out, the history here. Now if Peter turns around and aims the opposite direction, I understand that this entire area back in those days was nothing but a big field. So from 1865, that would be the first house to be built up in this area before Kenmir Avenue was eventually built out. And today I wanted to stop in front of number 40 Mill Street. We're at the corner of Hazlitt and Mills, and anybody who grew up in my era back in the 1960s will certainly recognize this area. This was the original school building, actually. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, went to school here back in the 1920s. Now, it was about 10 or 15 years ago, I was standing in this exact spot, and the man who owns the building, who I believe still currently owns the building, came out. I introduced myself, and he told me that the building was built in 1920, which to my mind, that means that the school was built shortly after the so-called Great War, World War I. After World War I, obviously, a lot of American soldiers died in that altercation, but following that, there was a period of growth. And this area started to grow, and they needed a school. So this school was built in 1920, to my knowledge, and that's where my grandmother went to school. It was multi-grades, 2 levels. I believe there's a basement, And during the time that I was going to school in the 1960s, this building was used as an admin building for the Board of Education. And my mother actually worked in this building as a clerical staff. So anyway, I wanted to point out this particular spot. And as kids in the 1960s, this was one of our favorite playgrounds. I don't know if you can get a shot of the parking lot. The parking lot, the way it is now, is the way it's always been. And believe it or not, we played touch football on that parking lot back in the 1960s with all of the boys. None of the girls really participated back then, but all of the boys who lived on Hazlitt and the neighboring areas here would come and we would play ball here. It was we'd go home with scratched knees many times, but it was a very, very common place for us to associate. Anyway, I wanted to show you this spot.
Okay, Bob, so we're at the corner of Mill Street and Early Street.
Yes, our next stop that I wanted to make. This is an important spot, very important for those of us kids that grew up in the 1960s. Because behind me, in the video, I'm sure you can see the Portofino's restaurant. Well, Portofino's is a very popular venue in Morristown right now. It has been for many years. But in the 1960s, Portofino's was Vion's Market. All the kids from this neighborhood came to Vion's Market. This was my last stop of the morning when I was heading into school. I would either stop into Vion's with a nickel to get some bubble gum or something. I'd chew bubble gum in class. Or I'd get a box of cough drops or something. If the teacher caught me chewing bubble gum and reprimanded me, well, the following day I'd get a box of cough drops, and she didn't seem to object too much for that. But I always had something I got from Vion's before I went into class each day. The school is only another block down, and this was my walk every morning. And after school, for lunch, we'd walk home. We'd come back, sometimes stopping at Vion's Market again, and then go to school and then back again at the end of the day, 3:15 when school was over. So this particular corner, so many kids from the 1960s will remember this exact spot. This was where the safety patrol stationed themselves. I was actually a safety patrol member for a number of years. It got to be a bit much getting up earlier after a while, so I eventually dropped off. I was actually captain of the safety patrol in sixth grade, and when I gave it up, I gave it over to one of my good friends. Gilbert Gibson was the next captain of the safety patrol. But this is where the safety patrol is stationed, helping the kids cross the street safely, watching out for cars. And this particular spot was a spot that hundreds and hundreds of kids from the time period will remember. Okay, we're now at Brewster Place, which is a small segment of roadway that's been truncated when Alexander Hamilton School was built. Now this is an interesting spot for me because, as you can see from the video, it's kind of a secluded spot. And for us young boys back at Alexander Hamilton School, it was our quick getaway when we didn't want the teachers to see us cutting classes. We would duck out the side door by the gymnasium, trot across the field, come up the steps here, and duck out onto Colonial Road from Brewster Place. This was our quick in and out. And also, if you notice the windows on the side of the school, back in 1960s, those windows were casement windows. And they were dual sash casements. And there was a method of opening them with a center hook. They were pivoted at the center, so the upper sash would slide down, the lower sash would slide up, and it would leave an opening of about 2.5 to 3 feet at the bottom. And we kids on the ground level would jump out that window to the ground, disappear when we wanted to cut class. Yeah, that was an interesting thing. And you see where the back wall to the school is? When we were having our sandlot baseball games, that's where home plate would be. At that time, there was also a baseball field over on this side with an actual backstop, but we would set up there against the brick of the side of the school, and that would be home plate, and we'd bat out in this direction. And if you hit a ball over the fence, that naturally was a home run. So a lot of kids, as they were getting older and a little stronger, were able to hit home runs over the fence here. Now you can see as I'm pointing here to this little aqueduct here, it's kind of it feeds into the creek. Atno Avenue brook goes around the side of the school, over by where that car is backing out now, and where the fence line is, that's where Atno Avenue brook feeds in. And over there was a favorite spot for a lot of us kids to hang. At recess time and after school on weekends and holidays, we would spend a lot of our time here down on this field. This was our playground. This was where we spent a majority of our lifetime as young children. It was a good spot. It was really a lot of fun growing up here. And if you can see where those people are standing right now, that's where they set up for the voting booths when, when it's voting day. And also, that parking lot there where the car's pulling through right now is where I learned to type. That's where they held the typing class, where I learned how to touch type on an old-fashioned manual typewriter. Back in the early 1960s, they had a class that they ran there one summertime. My mother registered me for that class, and I said to my mother, "What am I ever going to learn how to type for? I'm not going to be a secretary." Well, learning to type on an old manual typewriter and learning the touch typing technique of the 1950s, 1960s lasted me through my entire life of typing many hundreds and hundreds of pages for engineering reports. I typed all my schoolwork. One year for Christmas, I got a Sears typewriter for Christmas. Boy, was I thrilled with that. But even though I wasn't quite thrilled with it, it turned out to be one of the best gifts I had ever had, because I used that typewriter all the way up into graduate school. Okay, and that's what I wanted to say about the backyard. The schoolyard here, the way it is now, is quite a bit different than the way it was. On the left side over here, my left, there was a swing set. Right here in front of me, there was a merry-go-round at that time. Straight out in front, there was a what we call the monkey bars. All the kind of things that kids can't use today. We had all those playground equipments in those days. And it was a place to play. And there was even a basketball net. Yeah, it's still there. The basketball net's still there. That's been there as long as I can remember. And that was a favorite spot to shoot baskets and play one-on-one. So this was our home away from home. Not only when we were in school, but when we were out of school, we spent our time here. This was the place to be.
Okay, Bob, so we're on Washington Street, right across from Burnham Park.
Yes, and we're adjacent to Knox Road. Knox Road is one of those roadways that was truncated when the schools were built in the 1930s. And I'm sitting on a stone wall here with the Atno Avenue Creek running underneath me. The exit comes across Speedwell Avenue, across Washington Street from the outlet of Burnham Park. And this is where the Atno Avenue brook begins. This entire area here was owned by the Mills family back in the 1700s. Was a big part of Revolutionary history because, from my understanding, this particular farm at that time was an open field with nothing but a creek going through it. And it was a field where George Washington quartered his horses. That's my understanding from the history that I've read and heard about over the years, this entire area. And it was the Mills family at one time that dug out the ponds that eventually became Burnham Park ponds. And I do understand that there were 3 ponds at one time. The one pond was filled in back in the 1950s, maybe the 1940s, in order to build the first swimming pool. The swimming pool that was here in the 1960s was in the spot where one of the original ponds was. So this was also part of our playground. Being part of the creek, we kids from the time period when we weren't at one of the school fields, we'd be at Burnham Park. And again, the amount of time that I spent between here, the school fields, and in school far exceeded the amount of time that I ever spent at home. We were always outdoors. We had to be deathly sick to stay home. And that's the way it was back in the 1960s.
So Bob, where are we?
Well, we are at the corner of the parking lot for Alexander Hamilton School. And this particular spot, I'm sitting on the railing here right next to the creek. The creek that goes alongside here is the outlet from Burnham Park. It's the beginning of the Atno Avenue brook, and it is the actual beginning of the tunneling system that's underneath the high school field and goes all the way over to Atno, and then from Atno it goes all the way over to Speedwell Avenue and enters the Speedwell Avenue speakeasy tunnels. And as kids, this was a favorite hangout. Believe it or not, even during school time, during recess, some of us, on occasion, would hop the fence, get down to the creek, and get out of sight of the playground monitoring people. One of the teachers would always have to be monitoring the playground, and we would get out of sight. And I can say for a fact that a few cigarettes have been smoked down there during school time. Yes, and some planning for mischief also happened in this particular vicinity. So anyway, this fence line here has been replaced since the 1960s when I grew up. The fence was higher at that time, and it had barbed wire on the top.
Okay.
But hey, for 1960s preteens, little bit of barbed wire was just a challenge.
Yeah.
We managed to get over it. And some of us even got into the tunneling system right here. But I don't know if you can see, it doesn't show very well, but it goes under the parking lot, goes actually under one of the driveways for one of these houses now, crosses Mill Street, and goes completely through the high school field over to the bleachers. And then the creek opens up, the pipeline stops, and it opens up by the bleachers, and underneath the bleachers the water flows freely. And then at Atno Avenue it dives again into another tunnel. So this is the beginning of it. When we were kids, 1960s, I can honestly say that this play area here, not only for recess times during school, but after school, holidays, weekends, I literally spent more time here than I did in my own home. Literally, by far. And if you were to count the amount of time I spent in school and here after school and in between school sessions, it was probably 75 to 80% of my time was spent here with so many of the other kids from the neighborhood. This was our plays area. Now, on one of our other visits, we stopped over there by the fence line, and I pointed out some of the important aspects of the field from that time period, from that angle. But from here, I remember we used to set up a ball field, a sandlot type of ball field, with the school building as a backstop, and we would bat this way. Now, when you're 8 and 9 years old, and you're batting across field, well, if you could hit the fence, that was one heck of a shot. But as we got older, a couple of us got to be better hitters. They would start putting the ball over the fence into the neighbors' yards. Now, the actual ball field started here, about in this spot right here. Mm-hmm. And there was a backstop, and that's where the softball teams would practice, and they would bat out in this direction. And that was where I saw Gil Gibson one time put a ball over the fence line into one of those yards. That's the early street backyards. Now, back here in the 1960s, we had monkey bars, we had a merry-go-round. Oh, that thing was deadly. We had all kinds of equipment out here. The swing set, if I remember, was over in that corner. And you had to be fast on the run to get to the swing set during recess. If you weren't one of the first 4 kids to get there, you were not getting on the swings. So the swing set was very, very important to us. And then over in that area was some of the other, there was a stainless steel slide. Oh boy, on hot days, your butt would get burnt on that slide. But Peter, this was where we lived. Yeah. This was our home. This was more of a home to me than my own home on Mill Street. And that's what I wanted to say from this particular vantage point.
Yeah, good memories.
Okay, Peter, you're panning the newer style windows that are in Alexander Hamilton School now. But back in my day in the 1960s, those windows were a double sash arrangement where the 2 sashes would slide in channels adjacent to one another. And when the windows were opened, you would open them with a sash pole. When the windows were open, it left a 2.5 foot gap at the bottom and the top. And I can honestly say there were a few times where kids jumped out those windows if you were on the first floor. Kid wanted to cut class, get into a little mischief of some kind without the teacher knowing. The teacher would left the room for a minute or two, all of a sudden a couple kids were gone. Where did they go? Well, one day, one of the kids got out, and I believe it was during a recess time. Caught a garter snake out here by the creek, put it in a lunch bag, and brought it into class. Well, it didn't take long for that snake to get loose. And when that snake got loose in class, the pandemonium that erupted was like nothing I ever saw on a Little Rascals skit. If it had ever been videoed, it would have been perfect for Little Rascals, because everybody just went so afraid the snake, you know, it's just a garter snake, but when it hit the floor and started worming its way around the classroom, kids jumped up, jumped on top of their desk, they fell, books got scattered all over the place, some kids wet their pants. It was one pandemonium. I was frozen in place because I was up in front and I saw it, and the snake went for the back of the class, so I just stayed where I was. But anyway, that was one situation that happened after a recess time where somebody pulled a stunt that could have been really dangerous. And that's one of my recollections from the 1960s time frame. Okay, Peter, We're at the entrance to the Atno Avenue brook on the Atno Avenue side of the high school. And it's not a very good view to be able to see through the fence. A lot of this is rather new since, well, new meaning it wasn't here in the 1960s when we kids had access to this. It was rather easy access back in those days, and this is the actual spot where a number of boys from my time period entered the brook and walked all the way to Speedwell Avenue and got into the Speedwell Avenue speakeasy tunnels that this pipe crosses it. Pipe crosses Speedwell Avenue. So anyway, I wanted to show you this area, Peter, because this was a spot where kids all knew about. And I don't know what you can see from here. We may have to go around the other side to be able to see better what's on the other side. But the bleachers are on the opposite side of this with some tree growth that's more recent growing up in between, so you really can't see it too well from this vantage point. So we'll have to go around to the other side and get a better viewpoint. We are on the bleachers, the home team bleachers on Morristown High School field. These bleachers are metal now. Back in the 1960s when I was a boy, these were all made out of concrete, poured concrete. And the creek runs underneath. Now the concrete back in the 1960s would block the sun, of course. And on hot summer days, where do you think we'd be found? In the creek, wading in the creek, catching turtles and frogs and sometimes crayfish and things in there. So many of the kids from my time period are going to remember doing that. I'm sure that was kind of frowned upon at the time, but the teachers must have known that we were doing that. And we would do it on off hours mostly. We didn't do it during school days, but we'd be down here summertime, and in the heat of the summer, we'd be underneath, getting out of the sun, wading in the stream. The water was nice and cool. Back in those days, that was a favorite thing to do in the summertime. And we would spend a lot of time in the schoolyard. Actually, about where we were standing, at one time, there used to be a fenced-in tennis court right about in where we're standing now. And I never played tennis. My father liked to play tennis, but I never took to the sport. But some of the kids in school did. And a lot of people may know the Craigslist Craig. We would see him down here practicing his serves many a summertime. Yes, he's a famous Morristown High School student from 1972, I believe he graduated.
Yeah, Craig Newmark.
Craig Newmark, Craigslist Craig. Ball field also had a water fountain. It was probably the only water fountain around, so we were probably constantly dehydrated, but that water fountain was a favorite, which was over there at that end. And just more memories from the 1960s. I wanted to show everybody a little spot here because I have a story to tell. Atno Avenue is behind you. It's in front of me. And there was a day back in the 1970s when I was walking on Atno Avenue, and one of my friends rode by me on his motorcycle. He had a Honda 405 at the time, and the police were chasing him. Well, you know what he did? He pulled his bike into this parking lot, squeezed it through this opening, ran it all the way across the high school field to Mill Street, and he got to Mill Street before the police could get there and catch him. It was a hysterical thing. I disappeared because I didn't want to rat on my friend, so the police, if they came back to try to interview me, I knew nothing, didn't know a thing.
Yeah. Very Sergeant Schultz of you.
That was a hysterical moment. We would come out here because at about the point where I'm standing, or a little further inland, was a sluice gate that they would open to fill the swimming pool. It's now been all ducted underground, so it's all underground now. That was done probably in the late 1970s. They rebuilt this whole new swimming pool area, and they ducted the old brook underground. But the water from Burnham Park feeds under our feet through an underground aqueduct that comes out of Foster Fields, and it's part of the runoff from Picatinny Road. And that's the way it was back in the 1960s for filling Burnham Pool. Peter, last stop for our Memorial Day trek around town. I wanted to show you where the last remaining H stone is that I mentioned very early on in our first episode about the slate sidewalks and the slate stones.
Yep.
Well, they were marked with H's in many places, and we kids all knew we had to jump over them. And over the course of the years, the slate sidewalks were taken out, of course, and recycled and replaced with poured concrete. But the last remaining H marking in any slate stone that I know of in Morristown is right in front of me, right here, directly across from the library's parking lot. And that was basically one of the last things I wanted to show you.
Excellent.
On today's trip around town.
Perfect.
So it was a wonderful day to take a trip around town, and I really appreciate you coming to interview me on these little points of interest where we kids from the 1960s and 1970s all hung out and all the things that we did. And it was our life. That was our life at that time. And I'm hoping that these little interviews that you've done can stimulate some thoughts and memories among the viewers.
Well, thanks, Bob.
So thank you so much for doing it.
Thanks, Bob, for taking the time out.